The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, hello, Plan Academics. It's Michael. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes before we get started, so we're just sort of hanging out, giving everybody a chance to join. As always, you can use the chat pane, and I'll kick off the formal presentation in just a minute. There we go. We've got some familiar faces saying hello, good morning, hi folks. Just check your chat pane. I think our guest speaker is trying to gauge a little bit of, he's going to ask you folks about your experience. Okay, let's get things started. A big welcome to everybody who's joined us again today. Welcome back to Project Controls Masterclass. I have my date wrong. This is not May 15th. I apologize. I updated these slides, but I didn't put the date to May 29th. My apologies, but I'm really excited for today's presentation. Longtime collaborator of mine, Roshan Vani, is going to be here, and I will introduce him in just a moment. Just going to lay the ground rules once again before we begin. Don't forget, this is a great webinar, exclusive only for Plan Academy members. So if you're here, you're part of that exclusive group. Once again, we record all of our webinars. In case you didn't know, we post them in the library in your account on planacademy.com, so you can always go there and review the recording. If you have questions, we'll be using mainly the chat for these sessions, so use the chat or the questions pane in your GoToWebinar panel. Once again, what's Project Controls Masterclass? Well, this was my brainchild. I wanted to bring you guys a broader experience, a broader breadth of experience from all different walks of life in Project Controls. And this is where we bring every month and sometimes twice a month experts, industry experts. These are people who have been there, who have been in the trenches, who have great experience, who are following the trends in Project Controls. And we're covering all sorts of topics: cost, scheduling, claims, reporting, software. We're talking success and failures, and we're trying to get some inspiration out of these sessions as well. So welcome. And I'm just going to take a minute to let you know about the schedule. And today, Roshan Vani, we'll introduce him in a minute. Coming up in June, we have two excellent presentations. We have David Cumming, again, another longtime collaborator of ours, is going to talk about Primavera P6 EPPM. Are we ready yet? Is it ready? Should we be using it? What do you think? He's going to give us a little update on that. And the next two presentations, I'm really happy that we're able to get some women to join us and share their expertise. So we have Tanis Laviniak, who is with the Trillium Advisory Group, and she is an expert on lean and agile for construction. She's going to talk about that trend and how that's doing some exciting stuff, changing the ways we can deliver projects in a whole different way. Like it's a whole paradigm shift, the agile stuff. So I'm really excited to hear what Tanis is going to share with us. And in July, I'm really excited to bring in Julie Owen. Julie Owen is a big name in project controls. She has been the former president of the AACE. She and I sat on a board, a Primavera board, a long time ago. But she's a big name, and she's still very active in the project controls and AACE community. So I'm really excited to have her come and share with us her presentation on how the Los Angeles Metro is fast-tracking capital program management best practices. It's going to be an excellent presentation. I just want to let you know, I didn't get a slide up for this, but I wanted to remind you or let you know that Plan Academy will be at the AACE general meeting that is coming up in June. We will be there on the ground, and it's a great conference. If you're not aware of it, go have a quick Google AACE general meeting. You know, I think it's maybe one of the best project controls conferences that you're going to find where the topic is all about project controls. I think that's our place. So we are going to be there, and would love to meet you if you're going to be there as well. Without further ado, Roshan Vani, here he is. So I met Roshan online through some similar websites that we had way back in the day. Roshan had a pretty good website with lots of Primavera P6 stuff, and Plan Academy was doing similar. We got to chatting, and we've sort of been talking and sharing information ever since. Roshan started out with his own company called Nexus PMG. He's the chief operating officer there. And Nexus PMG still does lots of interesting work in engineering construction. He can tell you a little bit more about the specifics, but a couple of years ago, they started went for a, pardon me, Roshan. They started their own online tool called Cloud EPC, and it's a pretty interesting cloud-based platform that is helping industrial projects properly track their projects. He's going to tell us a little bit more about that. Roshan, are you there? You want to say hi? Oh, did I mute you and not unmute you? There we go. You're unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you now.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you want to hand me the reins, and I can. I appreciate the intro. I actually had a little slide about me, and let's see.
Well, if I duffed it, you're welcome to clean it up. So
no, you did a pretty good job. Let's see.
I did hand you the reins.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Wonderful. So I've prepared a couple of slides, and I'm hoping that the slides only kind of carry us through about 20 minutes of the overall time slot, and really looking forward to just kind of jumping into a couple of examples that I pulled from real life examples. And when Michael reached out to me and asked me to pick a topic and see if I'd be interested, the most relevant thing on what we've been doing on a day-to-day through Nexus PMG, and I'll explain what Nexus does here in a minute, is living and breathing construction progress. And so where I thought it would be really interesting is just do a really deep dive on progress and its value. How do we validate it? How do we deal with subjectivity? All of the issues and problems around the day-to-day life of progress. And what's funny is, as I was doing a little bit of research and trying to put together my thoughts, I actually stumbled on a great Plan Academy article. So a great read on this subject is planacademy.com, measuring project progress methods, which I actually ended up just going ahead and then kind of replicating that as one of my slides, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. But my end goal is really getting to a couple of examples and diving deep on how we at Nexus / Cloud EPC measure progress, and the tool we built to try to deal with it, kind of on the tail end as one of those examples. So anyway, the overview is, I was going to kind of quickly get through these slides in about 15 and 20 minutes, but I start out with about me and some of my background and some of my experience. I would enjoy, if while you're getting bored of listening to me talk, if you wanted to chat a little bit about the audience in the room, and if you could just give me a little bit of background on your name and some of your experience and maybe some of your proficiency with Primavera. It helped me to get through some of the slides a little quicker or spend a little bit more time in certain areas of my deck. I'd rather not spend a lot of time on the percent complete types if everyone in the room is more or less proficient in units percent complete versus duration, et cetera, and just kind of get to the meat and potatoes on the methods and minimizing subjectivity, and then going through a couple of examples. So feel free to start chatting away at any point. I'll keep my eye on it. I got the window up on my screen.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, folks. So Roshan's asking if you want to, give him a quick update using the chat. I don't know what it looks like on your end, guys. I have a questions pane where you guys post questions and I answer them. But there might also be a chat pane. You're welcome to use either one of those. And Roshan, what do you see? Do you see a chat pane or do you see a questions pane?
I see a chat pane, and it's organizers and panelists only. I'm not sure if the attendees are panelists or not.
And at the bottom, can you choose all entire audience or not?
Nope, I can only send you a question to pose to the group. So I assume you have to play liaison here. So you know what?
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, that'd be helpful if you could help post some of that. And like I said, I'll just keep an eye on it, and I'll get through the slides pretty quick. I'll go ahead and more or less assume that most folks have some level of understanding, just knowing about Plan Academy and what you offer, Michael. I'll assume that most of the folks have some level of understanding in Primavera and the percent complete types. And if I see something otherwise, I'll spend a little bit more time there.
That sounds good.
With that, a little bit about me and my career path and how I got to where I am, and kind of living and breathing probably a lot of what you folks on the attendees list are probably living. I started my career back in 2004 and actually came out through engineering. I'm a double E by study, and I started my career in the MEP world, dealing with architectural and in the AE world, working on light commercial and commercial based projects as a design engineer, and doing all the calculations and all that good stuff for electrical power distributions, and dabbled a little bit with HVAC calculations. And what ended up happening is I got a call from Bechtel in the industrial construction world, basically offering me to work on really big things and travel the world. And I said, yeah, I'd love to give that a shot. So I migrated over from the design world into project controls back in 2006, and started in their estimating group, and migrated from there on project into being an engineering planner, and spent about a year and a half in the home office working with a large engineering task force, working on a full EPC schedule. Like most planners in our world, I chased that work out to the field once we hit the ground, and took it on area as an area construction planner. And then through my own career progression, was able to migrate into doing some cost engineering on a large coal-fired power plant. Somewhere in there, I got engaged, and my wife said, you really need to move in with me. And so I decided to make the leap from Bechtel over to Fluor, and got closer to my wife, and started at Fluor as a senior planner. Worked my way up with Fluor to being a lead project controls lead within their organization. And then that was about the time, kind of that circa 2008, 9, 10, where really risk analysis was becoming a much bigger part of larger industrial construction projects. And I migrated from effectively going from the project controls lead to a risk manager on a large project, and becoming the SME for a region, the MENA region for them, on Primavera Risk, which I can't remember what it was called before then, and running a bunch of different risk-based Monte Carlo simulations, both qualitative and quantitative, both internal and external based tools, and that was a great transition for me. I was in the Middle East for about 3 years working on a large project where I met my co-founders, and we decided to didn't really want to be overseas anymore, and we took a lot of what we spent the better part of a decade learning in industry and started Nexus PMG, or Nexus Program Management Group, and went deep into effectively at the time being a project controls consultancy. We've grown that business quite a bit, and now are really more focused as independent engineering and owners engineering for infrastructure investors. So before an infrastructure investor puts their money into a project, we will be involved in the diligence phase, and then post investment, depending on the complexity and the risk profile of that project, we'll oftentimes stay on it and oversee the drawdown schedules. And this is really where progress plays a big part in our life, and I'll touch on it a little bit more, because validating where they are in construction is a big part of being able to sign off. And not just construction. I know I'm going to be heavily focused on construction, but this is also true on EPC jobs, where we also need to validate the engineering progress as well as procurement. So that entire EPC life cycle and the different phases of that life cycle, being able to really analyze what is the percent complete and how are we validating it, and doing our best to remove the subjectivity is a big part of Nexus PMG, and a part that I think gets overlooked in the overall not overlooked, but sometimes we talk about earned value management and all the great things it can do, but one of the biggest cores of the earned value process is the percent complete, and we'll really get into that here in a little bit more. And in that whole process, when we were building Nexus PMG and growing it, we quickly realized we needed a way to do a rules of credit physical progress tracking that was dynamic and that was not purely a linear based percent complete calculation. It was a weighted equivalent milestone based based on different units of production, which is the core of the industrial progress tracking with a main task and subtasks. And that's a little bit of what I'm going to explore a little bit in one of the core modules of Cloud EPC. So I'll give a couple of examples both in the tool that we developed as well as what we're seeing on the market through Excel, and a few other examples that I've just kind of copied from different projects and sanitized the data to just show you what we're seeing on the market, and just different examples and variations. So that's who I am, where I came from, and what I'm doing today. I spent a lot of time on the Cloud EPC side implementing the software in different organizations, and it's funny as everyone does it just slightly different, but more or less has the same struggles with percent complete and tracking progress. So just a overall kind of statement, but I think if you've been in the world and you've been in tracking project progress, I think you've probably heard this stated a couple times, but we need to know where we are before we can forecast where we're going, and forecasting is really the core of project controls. It was drilled into me back in 2004, even before I was in project controls, on really understanding where you are, being able to gather the data and say definitively what is the scope, where are we, and then using that input and analytics to be able to take a best guess on where we're going, and with the end goal of really influencing the outcome of the project is the end goal and the mission of really project controls, and on smaller projects, project management. And I drive that home with our team here, both on the Cloud EPC side as well as the Nexus PMG side of the house. I'm just gonna raise up my thing here and see how do I get back to my chat window? Sorry, bear with me, I'm just learning the interface. Okay, cool, I appreciate that, Mike. I'm seeing some of these come across.
Okay, great.
And so why is progress important? This is, sorry. we I opened up with this a little bit, but when we talk about earned value, the core part of the earned value management calculation is taking our total project budget multiplied by the percent of project completion. And there's lots of different ways and people will slice that differently, but effectively the core of the EV calculation, one of the two calculation legs of the calculation is budget times percent complete. So it's the core of everything we're doing. And what I see over and over on projects is, whether you're over-reported or you're under-reported, the inaccurate progress will skew. Sorry, give me a second. Will skew your KPIs and early warning indicators, which at the end of the day are the metrics that project management use day in and day out to make the best informed decision they can at the time. So if for whatever reason the inputs are wrong or the progress that is reported or the EV calculations and the KPIs that are being reported for whatever reason are wrong or cannot be explained, we oftentimes see inaccurate decisions being made, which cost the project time and money. So that's number one. Number two is cash is king on any project. And on a lot of the projects that we're looking at, while we are seeing some of these being milestone based, we're seeing more and more projects be tied to a percent complete. And so being able to, whether, if you're sitting on the EPC side or if you're sitting on the owner side, at the end of the day, being able to agree and validate what that percent complete is, to not choke an EPC contractor on percent complete for their billing perspective, and also not from a risk profile of the owner, not putting, overpaying your EPC for work that's not complete. It all comes back to that percent complete calculation and validating where you are. And then, there's the other part of it, which, especially for the folks that are sitting on the EPC side, there is a element on working with your accounting folks, and at least here in the United States, I'm not sure where everyone is based, but for GAAP requirements for construction-based companies, you need to be able to report a WIP or a work in progress, and that comes back to understanding what your percent complete is and being able to work with the controller and accurately report where your project is. And then finally, coming back to my risk roots, a lot of what we do in the risk programs is, if you're only 5% complete on a job versus 95% complete, the risk profile on that project looks completely different. And when you come up a level, there's usually a large contingency bucket on high risk projects that is tied to these projects, and being able to put that money to work in other areas is core to being able to grow a business. So, putting on my operations hat, if we have large sums of money that will never be spent on a project that's sitting in a contingency account, and the risk profile is being determined based on a to-go scope of work, that really comes back to the core percent complete calculation on where do we really believe we are. If there's a large amount of work or scope that isn't accounted for, then that progress calculation has the potential to be skewed. And again, coming back to the second bullet and the third bullet, I mean, management both on project and off project may be making decisions that necessarily have the ability to negatively impact both the project and potentially even the corporation. If you have any questions, feel free real time to go through Michael and ask, and we can come back or address them. I prefer these presentations to be collaborative, and so I'll keep an eye on the chat window.
Yep, and I'm doing the same.
Cool. And so, I got a little quote here, but I know it's not exactly project controls, but an economist is an expert who will know tomorrow why the things he predicted yesterday didn't happen today. And that really kind of comes back to that, for me at least, knowing where you are and being able to forecast where you're going. Just a nice play on words. And so with that, I'll start with Primavera, knowing that that's one of the core things for Plan Academy, and then really drive into the different methods of how do we not just use a software, but how do we apply methodologies around fields in a software to um, um, input these data points. So the first one is duration percent complete. It requires the least amount of input for, as most of you probably know. The percent complete is directly tied to, sorry guys, 1 second. Well, there we go. It says my notifications are off, that they're still coming through. So I guess there's another setting I got to figure out. Sorry about that. I do my best to keep those closed. So duration percent complete is great for linear based work. And so your roads, your, going up for a high rise, anything where, the percent complete is almost directly tied to the amount of remaining duration. The duration percent complete works all day long, and the forecasting is actually quite, in terms of time and number of units we're going to get done over a period of time, it works really well. Where it does not work really well is in non-uniform production. And when we talk about industrial projects, at least from my lens and a lot of my experience in the type of projects we do, we're talking about large piping jobs. We're talking about multidisciplinary jobs, lots of different areas, lots of different trades. And just that type of work is just a non-uniform production type of work. And so the duration percent complete 99% of the time is just not the right method to use for the types of projects when I say industrial projects. And so that really leaves us with the physical percent complete and the units percent complete to implement. And it's always difficult to pick which one. But being able to just input a physical percent complete, we see that being used quite a bit on different projects. And oftentimes those projects are backed up by some sort of Excel file. And just keeping my eye on the time, I'm going to start moving a little bit faster because I have a version or an example of that on how teams are using this and using third-party tracking like Excel or even Cloud EPC to track those physical percent, track those on an earned man-hour basis outside of Primavera, and then bring that back in through some sort of basic interface. The other thing the physical percent complete uses, and where I think Primavera has tried to solve this problem, is through activity steps. The problem with activity steps, and why I think most people end up coming out of the system, is all the other questions that happen on a project, like how many linear footage of pipe did we install in a particular area? And that's really where units percent complete comes into play, where users can actually input all the different actual labor units by resources. And this works really great too if you got multiple disciplines on a particular task. And so it really does well with non-uniform production. And again, you can, from a resource perspective, being able to validate with quantities and different metrics, we see units percent complete helping to remove some of the subjectivity on purely a physical percent complete, on someone just randomly saying 33% complete. Units has, puts us back into a, we have 33 widgets to install and we put in, 13. And so it helps us get back into validating some of those, back into percent completes and really validating where we are on the project. And that really ties back into the 6 different methods of the 6 different methods here, where this actually ties back to the article that we found on Plan Academy, where the first one being units, on where we talked a little bit on. This is really great for linear. Breaking that task into milestones helps take that larger task and break it down into subtasks, where where a great example is this is exactly what Primavera activity steps does, where you can break that task into subtasks and then complete those along the way, and then calculate a percent complete based on those hard milestones. Start and finish we see works really well on level of effort based task. We see a cost ratio, which I haven't personally used, but I know this is listed in this source. But it's great for like non-deliverable based progressing as well, which is another great level of effort. It tells us Very little for true physical percent complete though on deliverable based work. The next really being opinion, which I really hate personally. I know some folks still kind of live and breathe opinion based or expert judgment. I've never seen anything positive. This is a little bit of humor, but I've never seen anything positive come out of this method. It's very subjective, and it oftentimes leads to arguments at the project level, especially if there's billing tied to it. If there's folks like us on our side where we're trying to validate progress, it's very difficult to just say, yeah, we're 33.3% complete. Well, how'd you get to that number? And then what I think the Plan Academy article states as equivalent units, and what we are often pushing for on our projects, is using this model of equivalent units, or the weighted milestones, where each milestone can have a different unit and what I often like to call a rules of credit base. And can deal with different subtasks that have different units. And this is great. So if we think about, let's just think about a foundation we got to put in, breaking that foundation into formwork, rebar, embeds, placement, and then the different units associated, being able to do drawing takeoffs and say we have X square feet of formwork, X number of tonnage of rebar, et cetera, and then being able to validate off of a port ticket or how much we're actually pulling out on inputting into the ground, and actually being able to sit there and validate those metrics is probably the best way we've seen, and albeit the most time consuming way as well, which, I oftentimes think, depending on the size of the teams and the amount of budget, sometimes these other methods may make a little bit more sense depending on the complexity of the project and the size of the team. I'm not saying by any means there's a one size fits all, but we really appreciate and like the equivalent units, and it really helps take the subjectivity out of the process. And I think the one thing to really state coming off of that last slide is there is no universal ideal of progress, and it really is project specific, and it really comes down to the team understanding what they need to deliver, the complexity of the project, and what makes the most sense for the team and budget. So coming off of that last slide, while that may be the most transparent and the most and probably the best way we've seen and the least subjective way to track progress, I'm not saying that's always the right way to do it, but it is the method that we will be focusing on the different examples here over the next 15 minutes or so. And while breaking down large tasks into smaller subtasks can help measure smaller increments of work, typically there's still subjectivity in those smaller inputs. So let's just face it, progress is always somewhat subjective. So you can break it down to the nth degree, but there's always some level of subjectivity. There's always some level of human trust along the way. And you do your best in industrial construction and just reporting construction progress in general. There's got to be some level of trust between the owners and the contractors, and methods and processes and sample validations can help that. By having more details in the tools, you can help push subjectivity out of the inputs. But again, with more details comes more work, bigger team. So you do have to think about budgets and what makes the right sense for the project. And then getting agreement on the front end is tremendously important on a project. You don't want to be changing your rules of credit and your earned value methodology along the way. The goal is, at the end of the day, for both the contractor and the owner's team, is to really remove the subjectivity as much as possible. And really getting down to units planned versus units installed continues, at least through the lens and the experience that I have, is probably the best way to do that. And the equivalent units are more work and are not. Oh, so the one thing I guess I wanted to state as my transition point for examples is, while equivalent units are recommended, we struggle to do that work within Primavera. And what we continue to see on these larger, more complex jobs is teams are having to use other third-party tracking mechanisms that feed Primavera. And that's really where I'm going to go focus the examples on these larger industrial construction projects, and where we're seeing examples. Because while the equivalent units are more work, trying to do all of that resource management and input in Primavera, oftentimes we see the superintendents in the field have a hard time reporting it in, especially when you're burying multiple resources on a single unit. So using a tool like Excel or a tool like Cloud EPC can help mitigate that. Also, Primavera is somewhat difficult from getting input. We know that Primavera is offering other tools and solutions to help manage that process, which is great. But being able to collaboratively get that real-time input is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. And even with tools like Excel, you know, on large jobs that have multiple areas and need input across multiple team members, you know, you are still sometimes limited with Excel with multiple people working in the same files, and file sizes getting quite large and crashing. So I'll show you a couple different flavors and examples of what we're seeing right now on being able to take big jobs and break it down. And one of the things I really want to focus on is I'll do a couple examples on pipe. We see pipe continuously being probably one of the hardest things to track. One of the ones that, you know, not only is it tracking the installation of the pipe, but then being able to answer questions on top of that on how much pipe have we installed by area, how much are we ready for hydro test or just test packages by pipe by system, or by system by subsystem. So a lot of those questions are driving also having folks to have to come out of Primavera and use other third-party tools that I think is just kind of important when we talk about project progress. It's not simply reporting the progress, it's all the ad hoc reporting that you're going to have to do to support your project managers, your area managers, and all the different folks that are going to need input out of the tools that are put in place. And so, you know, kind of ending with the thought, progress is difficult. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is perspective, not the truth. As you know, I think that comes back to, you know, let's just face it, progress is always somewhat subjective. We do our best to remove subjectivity and deal in fact as much as we can. And, you know, I always, you know, when it was my job to track progress, that was one of the things where I tried to focus my time on is really getting back to the fundamentals on what do we gotta put in, how much have we installed, and really focusing on things we can track and trying to use, you know, whether it's a pour ticket for concrete or in engineering, trying to look at the actual drawings that are IOC that are on the document control system. The more we can focus on metrics and units, I think the more we can help remove subjectivity for both, you know, the owners teams that have to validate progress, as well as for the EPCs that have to, and the constructors that have to report progress. And so, keeping an eye on time, we're about 35 minutes in, so pretty close to where I want it to be. Where I'd like to spend the next kind of 10, 15 minutes, and I'm just going to pull up the screen here, see if there's any questions that have popped up. There are no questions. So what I'd like to do is move into just a couple of different examples. I'll give one example of where and I've changed numbers and did a whole bunch of things, so there's no sensitive project data here, but where a project team had to implement a tracking tool that also had to integrate with Primavera. They were using physical percent complete, and so let's see here, get out of here. And so if we look at this particular example, we have the disciplines along the bottom. You know, these disciplines are breaking down work tasks based on quantities installed. For every one of these tasks that they were having to accomplish in a different area, and forgive me, I've hidden a bunch of columns and a lot of the sensitive data, they're assigning a schedule ID of all in what we can see as a many to one. And what we oftentimes see in industrial construction is the Primavera schedule oftentimes stops at a level 3, or what I call a level 3.5. And the level 4, level 5 tracking mechanisms are oftentimes done in a third-party system. And in this example, it's Excel. Each of the different disciplines have their own widget-based tracker. All of the details that the job and the takeoffs that were done early on for the project are listed as row items here. And then what we see is we're implementing a rules of credit based or milestone equivalent units for those different tasks. And so for this example, we're looking at structural steel detail. We're seeing all the different linear footages and the weights that were taken off. We're also seeing total number of man hours estimated for that. And then the man hours are broken down typically based on loads, years and years and years worth of data. We're seeing that this project's coming down and the man hours we're earning out the man hours or progress based on these equivalent weighted percent complete. So in this case, we earn 5% for receive and shakeout, 10% for pre-assembly, 40% for erecting, 40% for connections and final bolt and rattle, and then 5% holdback for the final punch and sell off, which we're oftentimes seeing some sort of holdback just in case there's rework required. The effective sum product or the weighted percent complete then gives us an overall percent complete. And then we're taking that overall percent complete times the budget and coming back to the earned value calculation that I had in the slide earlier, the percent complete times that budget or the total number of man hours is giving us our earned man hours. And then for this particular discipline, we can take the total number of earned man hours divided by the total number of hours for each discipline, and even larger than that by the total project to get to an overall project percent complete. And so starting at the lowest level of detail, applying rules of credit on scope-based items that are based on quantities and widgets installed in the field, and then coming in and tracking that progress is effectively that equivalent units and that detail level tracking that we're oftentimes seeing both in the Nexus PMG world and what Cloud EPC has tried to take this methodology and solve. And I'll show you a couple different examples in Cloud EPC as well. Just kind of moving forward, that was an example of structural, of taking different rules of credit and doing a takeoff based on scope. We see the same thing on mechanical and applying those different rules and milestones. In this case, we're doing staging in the layout versus staging in the location. Sorry, in my sanitation here, I copied and pasted incorrectly. But staging in laydown in the location, setting in place and final sign off. Again, the same idea being you earn for each one of these tag pieces of equipment 5% on stage in the laydowns, 45 at location, 45 setting in place, and the last 5% on final sign off. Where I wanted to focus on is pipe, and I have another example of pipe in Cloud EPC, so I'll actually probably stop here and not go through every one of these tabs. And so in this example, you can see we're tracking by every single ISO, and every single ISO, we're doing a takeoff on total amount of linear footage that we have to receive, the amount of the number of cuts that have to happen on that, then total number of welds. In this case, it was done on each number of welds. We've even seen on different projects where the welds are actually done in weld inches, so a larger diameter pipe with multiple passes is more work. In this case, they did that takeoff based on diameter and then the number of total man hours they applied. So the welds are equivalent based on the total number of hours on that ISO or drawing. We're seeing off to the right here, and I apologize, I deleted my weightings, but on each one of these steps, there's a weighted earned value. So each one of these steps has a weight associated with them, just like we've seen on the other line items. And then the weighted percent complete is calculated along each one of these rules of credit. And as we calculate widgets installed, as I like to say, or units installed in the field, total number of linear foot installed or put in place, number of cuts done, welds installed, we're calculating an overall percent complete by ISO, which is calculating the earned man hours on that task. And then we can take that and for the overall project or for this particular discipline, aggregate those numbers and then run lots of different metrics. What I'd like to kind of stop and pivot on here a little bit is, especially in piping, but we see this in other areas of civil, and I may have a few of these hidden just for the project purposes, but in some of these hidden columns, what we have to oftentimes do on projects is not only answer the mail, as I like to say, for the owner on what's our percent complete, but for our teams in the field and in our toolbox set, we need to be able to understand what percentage of this pipe or linear footage is carbon steel, what area is this in, what system is this involved in, and what we see oftentimes is where these files get really large, and I'm sure what I always like to ask in my interview questions for project controls is, how good are you at pivot tables, SUMIFs, and lookups? Because giant spreadsheets like this, where there's an area designation, large SUMIF statements for these different rules of credit, to be able to do summaries by area or summaries by service, or is a core of industrial construction and being able to supply the field with lots and lots of information to be understanding where we at on, are we ready for hydro? What do we have left in punch list? And being able to answer those complicated questions, unfortunately, always comes back to project controls, and it becomes our livelihood. So we have to wear multiple hats, and then we need to be able to do lots and lots of ad hoc reporting, where these, I've seen some amazing Excel files in my consulting, where folks have just built incredible things to be able to deal with that ad hoc reporting. And what unfortunately ends up happening in that world, is these tools get built, and if you put on your ops hat, what ends up happening is these tools become very specific to a person, and there's a lot of complicated calculations and formulas that are tribal knowledge that get passed down to those people. From an ops perspective, that's really a single point of failure, because if for whatever reason something happens to that resource, or they get a better job, or they leave, if something breaks in some of these complicated tools, what you're stuck with, is really no support. And oftentimes you have to rebuild that tool. You have to figure out where that knowledge is coming from, and so you're spending a lot of time on these overhead functions.
So before you dive into Cloud EPC, quick question on these spreadsheets, because personally I haven't seen spreadsheets this detailed for progressing in my experience. It based on like some of the things that you were showing, could you do some of this in P6? Could you calculate these progress and the weightings and all that? I don't think so, right? Like the only way to do this, this has to be done outside of P6.
Steps will not let you put units on it, only resources, right? And so if you start trying to break down every single resource and every single kind of cost code and an activity group in the resources, then trying to go get that input in a logical fashion from the field team is just going to kill your project controls team. And one single planner on these multi-million-dollar jobs, even billion-dollar jobs, is impossible. You're just going to choke your planning team, and you're going to go 6-8x on your number of planners required on the job. And no offense to the folks on the call, but planners aren't cheap. And so when you're looking at trying to run a project and a project controls team and then managing your sales with it, it just gets very difficult to justify a team that big. And so what you see is these types of tools get built, we see it oftentimes we see it 99.9% of the time in large piping jobs. Yeah. So whether it's your power plants, your oil and gas, these large piping jobs is where I kind of wanted to focus a little bit, because this is where we always see one of these large trackers every single time.
Is there any date information in these spreadsheets, or is it mainly just
no, thank you. Progress? So what you see oftentimes is a way to get from these level 4, level 5 tracking sheets back up to your schedule IDs, where the dates and the time phasing come into play, right? And so what you see on each one of these tabs, and I thank you for pointing that out, I just kind of glossed over it, is there's a correlation to what task is this equivalent to in Primavera. And what you oftentimes see in these complicated spreadsheets is this aggregated, another complicated formula, where you're now taking all these drawings and rolling them up based on takeoffs into one of these schedule IDs, right? And then the schedule IDs are then pulling in the total number of hours, and I'm deleting and doing all kinds of stuff, but you're seeing these complicated sum ifs. You're also seeing the earned man hours, and you're seeing how you're rolling up from a detailed tracker back up into these detailed summary sheets. So now you can say, on that single schedule ID, now this is where you get full transparency to the owner's team. I can hand you a schedule with a percent complete that's 37% complete. And if you want to understand everything about it, I can go to my civil detail tracker, filter on that schedule ID, and I'll give you by single drawing everything I've basically put into the field to give you that percent complete to validate my progress.
Okay.
And you can imagine, the complexities and trying to deal with this and support the contracts, and then take that to a whole new level on things like piping, and where you're doing it with 1,000, 3,000 ISOs on a job. That can get very overwhelming.
Yeah, and the other thing that I can see is that there's a lot of room for error in these sort of manufactured formulas and things like that, right? Like a little typo, you could and fill that down, you could be tweaking everything by 5% or something like that, right? Like
We literally found on a consulting engagement, we were trying to validate project progress on, I think it was a $3 billion job, rounded numbers. They were off by 5%. They were over-reported by 5%. They had paid them. And you can do the math. That's a lot of money
yeah.
on a percent complete based invoicing. And so coming back to I think one of my slides where I talk about, there's multiple reasons why percent complete is so important, and you're absolutely right. Being able to validate progress, and especially when cash is king and you're coming back to payment schedules and all the other stuff on an operational based perspective, this is big dollar values we're talking about.
Yeah, let's see where you're taking us next.
So, where Cloud EPC comes into play, and we do all the other great stuff, and I'm not going to sit here and tout our software, but one of the things that we needed in Nexus and tying the storyline together was being able to validate progress. And oftentimes we get into markets where teams just have nothing. And so what we started with, and Cloud EPC is used on every single Nexus PMG job that the teams have nothing, and we can offer a solution. But we have the same idea of being able to take these complicated, this is just a pipe example I quickly genned up and I loaded, where we have the total number of allocated current budget. I'm not going to go through a full demo, but this idea of being able to take every single ISO, assigning the rules of credit or those weighted values, and I tried to keep it similar to the exact example we were looking at in that Excel tracker, and being able to say, for this particular drawing, we have X number of hours on that line item based on our takeoffs, and on that, based on those takeoffs, we also have, from a quantity perspective, X amount of linear foot of pipe, X amount of number of welds, pipe testing and bolt up. And one of the things, coming back to your point, Michael, is what doesn't work well in those Excel trackers is time-based, right? So what Cloud EPC does is it gives you, we are time-based system on a weekly base. So being able to say, look, on whatever week I'm updating for, I've installed, in this case, just say 10 out of 11 linear foot, which in our world is the equivalent of 83% complete. So we've taken 10 divided by 12 to get to that 83.3% complete, and then doing the weighted math on that, where 83 times 25 on a sum product basis means on the overall we're 20.83% complete. So in this case, we had 17 approximate hours on there, and 17 times 20% is 3.5 earned hours. And we're effectively doing the same math that you were seeing on those other complicated spreadsheets, except instead of tabs, we have these nice, we have the ability to, well, in this example, it's just pipe, but you would have all your disciplines and all your trackers in one nice, easy place that you can set up these different layouts, where in this case I had outside battery limits, inside battery limits, but you can code to your heart's content in a database. You can do all your takeoffs, you can apply all those on your rules of credit. But where I think the power in what we've been able to do, and where I think number one for operating groups is, the idea of these specialty tools that are being built by folks right now is great. And some of the things I'm seeing is just absolutely amazing, but there's a lot of that tribal knowledge, being able to standardize those processes on these large industrial construction jobs. And then starting to apply things like, unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to do it, but the test package number. And so now, where am I at by hydro? Where am I at by system? Where am I at, by everything on a drawing, if you're doing that, or area, sub area, really the 11 other user-defined fields. What we have is effectively we can take all of this data, all of these earned hours, all of these units of measure, and we have effectively the ability, give this a second to load here. What this is going to do is it gives us the ability in Cloud EPC, and this is really our special sauce on what we needed for Nexus, and what I think on some of these projects that you may be tracking is the ability to answer ad hoc reporting. So in this case, I coded under my activity task was my system for this example, and my WBS, I just coded area. So in this case, if I needed to answer area by system, I'm simply going to drop in my WBS and activity code, and I can answer things like how much by area upper D cooling water pipe do I have? And so I have my hours and my quantities here, and how much of that have I actually installed? I can then simply drop out area and get back to an overall project um, based on system. Had I coded test package or any of these other user defines, I can now drop in another real simple column, and I can pivot this data around based on, let's just say, system or subsystem or test package, so you can see none of these are coded. And what it's doing is effectively pivoting this data and starting to give you information on all of this data that you've captured in a database that we've traditionally seen in these large infrastructure jobs being lost in Excel. Now, and get to a point where only a few people can write complicated reports on that data, to really simplifying some of those reports and those outputs. And there's a whole bunch of other kind of bells and whistles, and we're kind of approaching the end of the hour. But I guess what I want to leave you with is what we're seeing, and what we're seeing the trend being on these larger industrial-based jobs where we're needing to track progress down at the ISO level. There's a growth trend in larger and larger Excel-based files, and there's a lot of great solutions and tools coming on the market, us being one. I actually saw you guys had an Innate present, which is awesome. They got a really cool version of this that's actually done through model integration, which is even cooler. Our target market isn't, they don't have access to a model. So our tool works really well. We play nice with Excel, but at the end of the day, having a system where you can take that, put it into a database, and be able to quickly slice and dice the data, for me and project controls, is getting people out of being data input and getting back into what I opened with, is being able to answer hard questions and forecast is really the job. And a software should not be the hindrance to that. It should be a tool that aids you in being able to forecast and answer hard questions like how much pipe have we installed by area, while also answering the question for the client that we're 33.3% complete, and here's how I calculate it to remove the subjectivity.
Yeah, that's a great point. When I look at those spreadsheets, I think, the skill set that of the person working that is project controls, but it's really, you become data jockey, right? Like, you just become a data entry kind of clerk. You're punching numbers in, you're copying formulas. Like, that's important stuff to do, but it's not the project control skill set. The project control skill set is analyzing the project, understanding what's going on, projecting, as you said, doing the data analysis to answer those hard questions. So let me ask you this, Roshan. How much time do you figure your system would save a project controller managing a similar project in Cloud EPC versus Excel?
The time function is really on what is the volume of your ad hoc reporting. The setup time between Excel and ours is pretty equivalent, where I think, where I always like to explain it is we more or less we're approximately 1 FTE of a project on a large industrial job, or a half FTE on a smaller $50 to $100 million job, in terms of savings, in terms of pure time. On a really large job, what a single person ends up doing, like you said, equations and making sure there's no errors and collecting input, we can save about 1 FTE worth of time on that project by implementing a system and allowing collaborative input within our software platform.
Yeah, that's impressive. That's a big savings. Question from Brian says, the example, the sheet you showed earlier, can you import from Excel?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We play real nice with Excel, so
Yeah.
So you can basically export and update template to Excel, update your values and import, and then everything you can see, click, or touch is permission based. So I'm in here as a full access super admin, but you could turn that functionality off for what I always like to call an update user. And then the other thing you can do is actually assign responsible people. And when they log in, the only thing they see is their tasks. Again, coming back to a spreadsheet, everyone always has to see everything on a spreadsheet. So it's really nice being able to come in and only limit what folks can see to their items. You can also filter down these subsets and create different layouts. And so, outside battery limits, for example, inside battery limits for area B, you can create a very specific layout and have just a ton of layouts. And then the data set is kind of gets subsetted to that. Lots of different things. We also play nice with Excel. So, you can effectively export this entire tool into Excel. Give that a second. It's going to do a full export. I should have given a little subset. And what it does is you can then get collection of input through Excel for whatever reason. We see this functionality getting used quite a bit actually on subcontractor input, where as much as I would love to just have everyone in our system, there's still lots of teams out there that are a little bit uncomfortable getting subcontract input. And so what they'll do is create a subset of data, export that data out, email that Excel file to a subcontractor to put in their input, and then basically go through the process of validating through through Excel, and then re-importing that data back in, and it'll do that update. Sorry, I'm running a massive update because I loaded 1,000 in this demo.
No worries.
So it's gonna, but effectively, oh, there we go. What it does is it'll take this data, create a version of this large Excel tracker that you guys are seeing. And again, I really didn't want to make this about my tool, but we're pretty proud of it. And so now you got that same piece, that scope, you got those items, you can bang in, just like I showed you, 100% complete for which week you want, and then it's doing data validation right here. You can also input this based on quantities installed. So
nice.
In this example, we have one each that was done on a takeoff. So you can say one, the week you're updating for, and it'll tell you it's going to import 100% into the system in one widget. So a lot of just nice bells and whistles.
Yeah, so you've got like that date column's already got the dates pre-populated. Is that right? Like from a pick list.
Yeah. So that's all coming from the system, and the system will do just kind of, if you're giving me the platform to kind of tout the tool, I'll go ahead and do it for a second. Well, this one's not a great example. We go to this power plant demo. So we do all kinds, because we are time-based, right? We have lots of different cool dashboards and cool things. So you can see in this one where you have the ability to drill down based on those codings. So in this one, we went from engineering all the way down to calculations for a particular discipline. You can you spread your hours from Primavera. And so based on how your hours are spread from Primavera, it's going to do for a particular week that you're in. So in this case, I'm in week May 31st, 2019. We should be 100% complete. Again, these demo accounts aren't updated. We've only updated, we're 36% complete. Mm-hmm. So we can drill into procurement and see mechanical equipments behind, for example. Again, as you earn out over time, we do all of this time-based earn value, so you can see what's my plan versus my actual earned. We do performance calculations, so you can import your actual hours in. So you're doing your earned over your burned over time, both cumulatively and incrementally. And then you also put in an FTE calculator. So, if you're working 40s or 50s, it's telling you equivalent manpower versus what you're actually spending. So progress, performance, and manpower is the core of everything I always look at on a project to be able to analyze. And then we do the same thing for quantities. So spreading your quantities over time and your units over time, and then being able to draw dashboards on that. We also track cost and do full change management and everything else. But the progress is really, we're not aware of anything else like it on the market, which is why we built it. It was our first module, and it was the first problem we needed to solve, because at the end of the day, we're all technologists at heart. I spent the better part of, you looked at my history early on, building those tools and those tracking tools at the companies I came from, and it just irritated me. I really wanted to have something I could keep leaning on, and I knew when we started our company, I didn't want our team building these things from scratch every single project. So that was the first problem we set out to solve, and really what the core of Cloud EPC is based on. We're 2 minutes over, Michael. I apologize.
Yeah, that's okay. We can go over a few minutes. There's a couple questions coming in, so I'll throw them out to you here. Isam's asking, does Cloud EPC, is it similar to Prime, Oracle Prime, or Unifier?
the little bit I know about those tools, it's simplifying the input of what lives on top of Primavera. And so my answer is there's a methodology that's very similar, right? Which is inputting percent complete and quantities into Primavera is difficult. Oracle recognized it's difficult, and they created software on top of it, which is Oracle Prime, where you can gather collaboratively inputs, and then that can feed back into your Primavera P6. I don't pretend to be a Prime expert. I'm not sure what else it really does. I know there's a dashboarding functionality on top of it. So I would think there's elements of it that are very similar. But I still am not familiar with a tool that can do all of the user-defined coding plus all of the standard system, subsystem, hydro test package coding that we do, and then be able to really track, where are we at overall progress, but also being able to pivot that data around, and then start answering questions like how much pipe have we put in by system on electrical, are we ready for loop checks by a certain MCC? Are we do we want to go hot for a particular electrical subsystem? Where are we at? Just being able to answer a lot of those harder questions that keep coming up on construction projects, that we continue to see tools be developed outside of Oracle-based platforms that unfortunately project controls are left with, stuck developing.
Yeah.
We don't know of anything else on the market, and we're hearing from our clients that Prime is not exactly developed to do that. It's really just developed, and Michael, maybe you can help me here to really help streamline and dashboard out on top of Primavera.
To be honest, I'm not really up to snuff with my Prime or my Unifier either. I know a little bit about Prime too, but Prime has been built in different modules, and so I haven't seen the whole thing end to end because there's been a bunch of different modules that have come out at different times. So yeah, I don't think I can comment too much on how your tool compares. But Halasio wants to know, does your tool import from P6 as well? Is that how you get your scheduled data into it?
Yeah, so we have the ability to import right from Excel. And then if you are using web services, we can import from P6. You take those scheduled tasks, and just like I showed you in the Excel version, we do a similar method where you can apply, give a second to load, you can apply those schedule IDs onto each one of these tasks. So you're just going through a mapping process, just like you're doing in Excel.
But do you import the file, or do you go right to the database?
So we go, if you're using web services,
yeah,
we go right to the database. Otherwise, you can just go, what we're seeing honestly is, and man, I'll dance softly around it, but we're not seeing a lot of companies yet, at least in the industrial world, go to the web services and is part of your web master series, are you getting someone to talk about the kind of where Primavera Web is going? And I'd be curious to know how they're seeing the market adopt that, because what we continue to hear is we're still seeing a lot of standalone and a lot of the older P6 versions being used and not migrating over to the web services. What we've done to fix that is you can simply export your Primavera schedule into Excel, populate it and just import it in.
Okay.
And then you have the ability, let me go back to the Plan Academy example. So I just made up a quick schedule. I just imported that from Excel. So here's all your schedule IDs, your start dates and end dates. And then based on how you go out and map all of that, you're seeing by schedule ID, how many hours have we earned, and what's my percent complete on that task. And we get it down to the resource code level as well. So I think on this example, I kept it really simple, but if you're doing multiple resources in Primavera, we can deal with that as well. Or if you're just kind of doing everything at a total schedule ID level, we can just total number of man hours or work hours, and then how much of that has been earned.
Okay. Raul had a question. I think he might have dropped off, but let's ask it anyways. Can your tool be used for brownfield or turnarounds? He says some large EPC projects are also managed more by physical percentage without the need of those fancy Excel spreadsheets. Thoughts on that?
So the one thing is we are a week-based system, and I know turnaround is usually planned down to the hour.
Yeah.
So I would think that's a gap. I would argue that, coming back to my slide deck, that physical percent complete, if it's not really grounded in units, is subjective. And then I'll also come back to my slide deck that says if the owner's team is perfectly happy, and if you're down to the hour on a turnaround, I mean, the book to burn, the juice is not worth the squeeze. So a tool like ours or a fancy spreadsheet's not worth the time. And I just don't think that's the right application for a software like this. I think you're absolutely right. I think you can get by on, if you're planning down to the hour, that you're close enough between 0 and 100 on just entering a physical percent complete based on expert judgment, because by the time you get through validating units on that one, you're already on to the next task. So I would probably agree with that statement is what I'm saying in a long-winded answer.
At the same time, in turnarounds, there's a lot of like small tasks that as you said, it's either not started or done probably. So, but you
which is activity steps, right? I mean, the subtasks really activity steps. So I mean,
that's a good point too. Yeah.
What's already in the platform will work you got it all in one place. Why do anything different?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Halasio asks again, what happens when your Excel units percent complete disagree with your P6 percent complete?
I would argue if you're using it correctly through the schedule interface, Cloud EPC is your level 4, level 5 tracker, or your schedule tool is your level 4 level tracker. And so it is what's updating Primavera. People are not updating Primavera directly in this world. So if you're going through the time of creating these spreadsheets, that is quote unquote your record of truth for your actual physical progress or units installed. And so you're performing an import from those spreadsheets or from Cloud EPC to update your my point is, if you're doing it correctly, that is what's feeding Primavera, and you should not be out of step. And if you are out of step, you need a reconciliation to occur.
Okay. Does Cloud EPC have a tool to like what I heard is the schedule is level 4, your tool goes down to level 5, let's say, or deeper. Can you feed the data back into P6 then?
Yep. So you would export this down. So these are your schedule IDs, your units, earned units, your remaining units, your percent complete. So you would effectively import this right back into Primavera is what we see folks do. Pretty much like this, right? I mean, it's no different than what we see in these spreadsheets that folks are doing, where you have some sort of reconciliation process back to your schedule, where you're running this all back in. And just to clarify, what we typically see, if you're going through this level of effort, you're going to stop at a level 3, in some cases maybe a level 3.5 in your Primavera, and you're going to do all the heavy lifting outside of Primavera in a level 4, level 5, where I call your level 4 these tasks going down this way, and your level 5 is kind of your rules of credit across the top. So that's your level 5 tracking, that's your level 4 tracking. And then it maps you back up to a level 3 is what I call it, your Primavera.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's great. Given the time, I'm going to take back presentation here for a minute. Thanks, Roshan. Lots of stuff in there. We've had other presentations on percent complete, but we've really seen it from a very detailed and different perspective, like the industrial project perspective. Interesting stuff. Like, I haven't looked at those huge spreadsheets, and your tool, Cloud EPC, looks really cool. So folks, how was today's presentation? If you liked it, go ahead and rate it for us. Head over to the library. You'll see the presentation posted there. It should be there shortly, and you can just click on it and go ahead and give us a rating. We'd love to hear your feedback. We'd love to let you know. We'd love to know what you thought, basically. Roshan, big thanks. I'm thrilled with what you share with us today. So thanks again for coming out and doing this for us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Just a final reminder. Actually, Roshan, you were asking next. Well, not next week, the week after. On June 12th, we have David coming. He is going to come and talk about P6 EPPM and what's new, what's happening there. So be sure to put that in your calendar. And check out these other presentations coming up as well. Make sure you put them in your calendar. We have more presentations coming in September. We're going to take August off, but we'll be back in September, and we're starting to build that list of presentations for you all soon. So yeah, thank you, Roshan. Super pleased. It was great to hang out with you again and see what you've been up to as well. I'm pretty impressed with Cloud EPC. Are
Thank you.
you
Yeah.
guys going to the AACE conference by any chance?
We are not. So I'd love to. It's there's a lot going on right now. So unfortunately, I very little free time. But I'll definitely catch you on a couple of these other ones. I think you're going to a couple different conferences. So let's try to catch up.
Sounds great. We'll do. Thanks everyone for joining us. Give us a couple hours. We'll get the recording up for you, and we'll see you at the next one in June 12th. Take care.
Thank you.